Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. It's day 570 of the 3-day military operation in Ukraine. This is Spartan News. I'm the Spartan. Before we get started, I just want to say getting a lot more views on these videos and streams. If you could, please like and specifically subscribe, and then maybe turn on notifications. That'll help defeat the ever-present algorithm. Just trying to get to the front of the page on some views and that sort of thing. And the more views we get, the more views we'll get. That's kind of the way it works, right? With YouTube. I also have a Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. If you ever find something valuable enough where you think you'd like to contribute and help the stream, it would be very, very appreciated. But I'm really looking for likes and subscribes at the moment to boost us up and get us front and center. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to cover off the losses over the last 24 hours that the Russian military has suffered, and then going to go down a teeny bit of a possibly an early rabbit hole on something that's going on in Russia. We'll see. It could be nothing, or it could be the start of something bigger. Excuse me. So the Russian losses as of September 16th, 350 men, which is on the low side, 4 tanks, also on the low side, 10 APVs, definitely on the low side, as is artillery at 18, 24 UAVs is pretty good. I say that's pretty good. I mean, it's great if you're taking down an ISR, an observational drone that the enemy is using. However, if it's a Shahed drone that's over top of Ukrainian cities and airspace, and you're taking that one down, it's stopping it from hitting somebody directly, but it is causing potential damage, destruction, etc. And it is an offensive weapon being used in Ukrainian territory. So, grain of salt on the UAVs always. 32 vehicles and fuel tanks is fantastic. Every single one of these vehicles could be a civilian transport truck that's carrying 5 to 10 tons of equipment, personnel, etc. Fuel tanks, trying to keep the front lines running for the Russians. So you take those out. It's what's the saying? Amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics, or something like that. I might have that wrong, but anyways. And we're just over $86 billion in accrued Russian military losses. Now, there are some caveats here. Number one, on the boats and ships, that was stuck at 19 forever, and then it moved to 20 with the Rapucha landing craft being destroyed in the dry dock in Sevastopol, along with the Kilo class submarine. That being said, by my count, there are 3 and possibly 5 additional ships that have been struck at sea by unmanned surface vessels or unmanned underwater vessels. That's USVs or UUVs. The last one, or one of the last ones, may have been a UUV. It doesn't roll off the tongue as much, but anyways. So those 5 ships, I don't believe any of them are credibly claimed to have sunk. But 3 to 5 of them have been credibly claimed to have been hit. And we have visual evidence on at least 2 of them. And so while they're not technically destroyed and removed permanently from the battlefield, so they wouldn't show up on these stats, they are actually removed from the battle space for the foreseeable future. Especially if you think about a very large, like a Sea Baby type USV, striking one of these ships in the aft section of the ship, flooding some compartments, specifically the engine room, with salt water. The saltwater damage alone can basically ruin diesel electric engines. They're basically complete write-offs, especially if they keep running and ingesting that salt water. on top of the structural damage. It could be the superstructure, it could be outer hull damage, etc. But you put all that together, and the fact that you may not have accessible dry docks for a while to repair, you could have basically a parking lot or a lineup of vehicles requiring repair. So it's just a little caveat there that the boats, ships, and cutters is sitting at 20, but in my head it's probably more likely 23 to 25, because the Russians do not have the infrastructure capacity, maybe parts to and possibly dry docks to fix those ships in the near future. Something to keep in mind. Now, moving on to the thumbnail topic. In Irkutsk, central Russia, there is an oil field, oil company and oil field run by the Dulisima Oil Company. Several dozen representatives of private security companies in camouflage seized the territory, basically seized the property of the Dulisima Oil Company in the Irkutsk region. A video from the site shows PSC, which is private, private service contractors, private security contractors, thank you, firing in the air and forcing the company's employees to the ground. Russian media sources claim that this is no ordinary raid and that things are more complicated. I don't know what that means. In principle, I think this is the quote from them. In principle, we do not need to go into details. The main thing is there will be more and more such guys with machine guns hopping around Russia, and more issues in the Russian forces will be resolved precisely this way. So, I'll show the video. No one is injured in this video, but it looks like the employees have been removed potentially from an office building and brought outside and told to lay down, but no one is hurt or injured. So it looks like they're all being brought out. Everybody lay down. And these are just gunshots in the air. So just want to make that clear for anybody out there. So I like this one, Derek. This is meaningful, but I want to know what it means domestically for Russia. So I was reading through some of the comments to try to find if there was any sort of credible summary of what we have seen. And it's very difficult to know. So as some of you may know, more and more private military contractors have been sprouting up. And then after the whole Wagner debacle, the Russian, Putin and the Russian MOD basically mandated that as of July 1st, and I think since then they've reinforced it a few times. Anybody who's a part of a private military, either PMC, PSC, whatever you want to call them, contractor, has to basically sign allegiance to, whatever. I haven't seen what the contract looks like, but register with the Russian MOD. So basically keeping them under the MOD umbrella, even if they do have kind of an arm's length setup with other companies, etc. Now, we do know that Shoigu and maybe Gerasimov and some of the oligarchs, I believe, have all started to create their own PSCs, PMCs. So I don't know. I wasn't able to find out prior to the stream who these particular, if they are in fact PSC soldiers, which by all accounts they are. Soldiers is a loose term, but who they work for. Do they work for the actual company itself? And there was a strike brewing. Do they work for some sort of a regional oligarch or power that basically wanted the oil field for themselves? Is this the PSC turning against their their leadership, ownership, or whatever, basically deciding to take oil fields for themselves. We don't know. What I do know, what I was able to find out, unless something has changed, but the most recent information I have is Dulisima Oil Company is owned by Lukoil. And, sorry, wrong one. And Lukoil, if you remember correctly, their chairman back in September was one of the ones that spoke out and asked and basically stated that Lukoil's position is that the war in Ukraine should end. And then that chairman all of a sudden fell very ill and had to go to the hospital in an upper floor of the hospital. And then while in that hospital, he accidentally fell out of a window in the hospital. So that's as much information as I know about Lukoil. Basically, the Kremlin probably removed any people from the top of Lukoil that were causing any problems or bad press. I don't know if this is one of the ones that Shoigu took over, if, it's Fairbank or Gazprom or somebody else has actual control or ownership over Lukoil now. I do not know. It's very, very difficult even to find that information out. But something to keep in mind that this particular oil field in the center of Russia, literally a quarter of the way around the world, has been taken over by a PMC. And are they pulling a Wagner and are going to be running roughshod around central Russia since there's no other military around there? Or is this basically a disciplinary thing? I do not know, but it's something where I think some of us kind of missed the early starts of the Wagner, what could have happened. And I'm definitely not saying this is Wagner-like, but for a company that is potentially now owned and controlled by Russian interests, like by Russian government military interests, it seems very, very strange that a PSC would show up at this oil field in the middle of really nowhere, not near any major cities, and take over, air quote, take over an operating oil company. So something to watch out for. And again, let's move on. So if you'll recall, the Samum corvette was reportedly struck by Ukrainian USVs or UUVs, or at least plural, singular, in the past 36 hours or so. And after every single one of these attacks, literally, the Russians come out and say, all drones were destroyed, no damage to the ship, life goes on, everything is great. Well, this corvette, the Samum, is being towed back into port. And it's not a heavy list, but you can see it is listing at the rear and to the port side. That's the left side, right? So this right front is higher up out of the water, and the back left is sunk lower in the water. There's one thing I wanted to show. So, yeah. Anyways, so it appears, and now we don't know for sure, but it appears that it was struck above the waterline, so it hasn't taken in. There are claims that people have seen the actual hole, and that you can see that it is completely above the waterline. I have not seen a close-up of that to prove that, but anything that makes a large corvette like this list that much, it's clearly taken on water. If the hole was completely above the waterline, then you wouldn't think it would have taken on water, or that enough to make the ship list like that. But clearly something has happened to it to make it list, take on water. Most likely it's going to have since the engine's in the rear and it's listing to the rear, and reports are that it was struck in the rear, most likely the engine compartment was flooded, and most likely there's saltwater damage amongst possibly structural damage, etc. This this ship has been referred to as a hovercraft and as a corvette and etc. And there's some confusion around there, and a catamaran. So apparently, and I have not been able to see the underside of this ship in, specific, like, dry dock pictures, that sort of thing. But apparently, this particular ship is it is a quasi, if you want to call it that, hovercraft quasi catamaran. So it apparently has a catamaran hull with skirts, and is able to pump air under the hull, inflating the skirts and raising the ship up when it's moving at a high speed. And apparently the air gets trapped underneath those skirts, and then it kind of raises the ship up on a cushion of air as it picks up speed, and is able to move exceptionally fast. So first of all, here's the basically the measurements of the ship. It's 66 meters long and 17 meters wide, and it has about a 10-foot draft, which basically means the lowest part of the hull is 10 feet down, 1 story down underneath the water. It's got 4 200 kilowatt diesel driven generators, propulsion, etc. The speed is really interesting. If you know anything about larger ships like a corvette, you can basically equate miles to knots. It's not exact, but there's knots are a little whatever. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to mess that up. But 55 knots or 63 miles per hour is its max speed. That's up on its catamarans with the air flowing into the skirts and basically acting as a quasi hovercraft. So anyways, that just kind of clarifies that, because I've seen some people say it's a hovercraft, and then other people are arguing saying it doesn't look like a hovercraft, it looks like a warship. So there you go. Moving right along. So the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces shared detail about their role in the destruction of the Russian Kilo-class submarine and the Rapucha-class landing ship in Minsk, Sevastopol. It's not in Minsk. It's in Sevastopol. But anyways, the Special Operations Forces were reportedly... do you guys want to know where Minsk is? Minsk is in Poland. They weren't destroyed at Poland. Just throwing that out there. Anyways, I make mistakes all the time, so I'm not going to trash on this person too much, whoever posted it. But yeah, that is Sevastopol on September 13th. Special Operations Forces were reportedly tasked with identifying targets, guiding and adjusting fire, as well as reconnaissance at the operational level. This is a different filter on this. I think I've seen this before, but it wasn't with the purple filter. That might be the actual SOF. The destruction of the Russian ship and submarine in the temporary occupied Crimea became possible thanks to the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces. How this operation was carried out: Ukrainian SOF received information from several sources about the probable location of the large landing ship Minsk. It's the ship is the Minsk, but it's in Minsk, and the diesel electric submarine, the Rostov-on-Don. And it's funny because the Minsk is the capital of Poland, and the Rostov-on-Don is where the Wagner started up their mutiny in just southeast of Crimea, or southeast of Ukraine. At one of the ship repair enterprises in Sevastopol, in order to identify targets, guide and adjust fire, as well as reconnaissance at the operational depth of the enemy, Special Operations Forces were involved. SOF team reached a safe place by boat and used underwater to deliver means to reach the mainland. Having conducted a successful infiltration, soldiers almost sounds like they came in by sub, but having conducted a successful infiltration, soldiers began to carry out the main part of the operation with the help of special technical assets, which probably would be drones. Identification of the target and targeting was carried out. During a direct hit, the group adjusted fire and confirmed the destruction of targets. After that, our warriors conducted a successful extraction. It's nothing new there. It's very, very cool and intense, but nothing new there. I'm not giving away state secrets. That's exactly how every special operations force on the planet basically operates. All this became possible thanks to the professionalism and audacity of our soldiers. Above mentioned information is published after a certain time, taking into account operational security and making the enemy understand that there is no longer a safe place for them. Going ahead. Landing ship Minsk. Yeah, so that was me. I misread that. Anyways, so very interesting. The U.S., as an FYI, very, very related to Sevastopol, USVs, etc. The U.S. Senate Armed Service Committee has initiated an inquiry into the national security implications stemming from Elon Musk's choice to restrict his private satellite network Starlink in the vicinity of Crimea. Committee Chairman Jack Reed emphasized that neither Elon Musk nor any private individual can unilaterally determine matters of U.S. national security. I will say there was a comment that kind of surprised me last night. There's another channel that I watch religiously. Love the host and creator, etc. Love everything that they do. But one statement was made that Elon Musk can do whatever he wants with his private company, even if under contract, but with the U.S. Military. Department of Defense. That is absolutely incorrect. If every privately held company could do what they want, even under contract, then Northrop Grumman could basically shut off its planes if they felt that the U.S. was bringing its planes across the border into a country that they didn't feel was right. Or General Dynamics could shut off the inner workings of M1A2 Abrams tank because of the fact that that tank was attacking a target that General Dynamics did not feel was relevant. Or Armalite could basically say we want all our rifles, or whatever. I'm just making that one up, but you know what I mean. Like any contractor, any company that's under contract with the U.S. military does not have the right to do what they want with their company, whether or not they've signed on the dotted line. Once you sign on the dotted line, you're basically signing over ownership, potentially development, ownership, use, etc. of that particular technology, hardware, infrastructure, whatever it happens to be. When Elon Musk restricted Starlink in Crimea and basically didn't tell anybody until the Ukrainians confirmed with him whether or not Starlink was available in Crimea, that was at that point still, Starlink was still donating its subscriptions and hardware to the Ukrainian military, and a contract had not been signed with the Department of Defense. So in that case, yes, I agree with the channel from last night that you can actually make the case that Elon could pull that hardware back, shut it off, geofence it, etc. And he was well within his rights. It doesn't make it ethical, it doesn't make it right, but it does make it potentially legal for him to do that while he's donating products and services. Horrible thing to do, to geofence it based on conversations you had with the enemy. But once he signed that contract, once Starlink signed that contract with the Department of Defense, he is out of the mix. Whatever the Department of Defense signed off on or purchased or whatever, which was by all accounts 500 plus Starlink terminals, the subscriptions, the software, where they can use it, when they can use it, etc. That all became the property of the Department of Defense, and Starlink was basically mandated to keep it running and operating, and that is it. That's how it works. Trust me. Search it up if you don't believe me. In other news, disappointing news, but Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has basically stated that, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but has basically stated that Sweden has still not fulfilled the promises made to Turkey to join NATO, and the EU and Turkey may take different paths. In July, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg reported Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed to ratify Sweden's accession to NATO. Erdogan himself reported that the Turkish parliament would not make a decision on the application as early as October. Now the leader claims that Sweden is sending terrorists to demonstrations under the protection of Swedish police and is failing to fulfill its promises. This is categorically false. In fact, Sweden has passed a law against burning the Quran, and is doing whatever it can to basically restrict anything that would upset the apple cart, so to speak. Erdogan waffles or keeps a foot on both sides of the fence, whatever terminology you want to use. And typically when he does something like this, he's looking to negotiate. He's looking for something, whether it is for Patriots or F-16s or whatever it happens to be. But he's very mercurial, and he tends to put his finger up in the wind and basically see which way it's blowing and kind of step that way a little bit. He's played hardball with Russia when he needs to. They supply Bayraktars and other technology and armored personnel carriers, etc., to Ukraine. And at the same time, they allow Russia to all of a sudden pull out of the grain deal, and they have not enforced any part of it and not provided escorts, etc., in the Black Sea. And then basically met with Putin and then started trying to negotiate with NATO, saying people should meet Putin halfway and give in to some of his demands to get the grain deal back in place. So it seems like in the flavor of this month so far is that Erdogan has now stepped back into Putin's camp and is playing a little hardball with Sweden to get the last member added to NATO. I would see this is going to spur a bunch of negotiations. Turkey's economy is in a mess, and this may be something economic for Turkey. This may be something militarily for Turkey. Like I said, they know they've got crappy S-400s that don't work. They know they want F-16s to upgrade their air force, and there are many other things on their wish list. So this could be related to anything or none of it. But something to keep an eye on. Very disappointing. This was a post that I saw today that I thought it would be good to at least show. This came out from a couple of Ukrainian sources. We've identified 34 non-Russian foreign persons involved in the international observation of Russian elections in the occupied Ukrainian territories. See the table below. So these people have basically validated the election process in the Luhansk and Kherson and Zaporizhia and Kharkiv Oblast, and have basically traveled to those occupied territories and observed the sham elections that the Russians held. Do you recall that 3 minutes after the polling was open, over 53% of people had voted in, I believe it was the Luhansk Oblast, which is physically impossible. These people are from all over the world: Spain, Indonesia, Brazil, Netherlands, the US has 3, Iceland has a couple, Argentina, Serbia, Germany, Venezuela, Cameroon, Switzerland, Ecuador. By entering Ukrainian territories illegally, all international observers have violated Ukrainian laws, and we call on relevant national authorities to inform their citizens of the consequences that they may face for their participation in the Russian propaganda efforts. We also call on the EU to consider imposing sanctions and visa restrictions on all non-EU citizens involved in the illegal activities in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. So there you go. Disappointing. Russia trying to validate their elections by bringing in those people. Going on, St. Petersburg. Just wanted to show a couple more videos of this. That mall that went up was basically fully engulfed, and it's one of the most intense fires I've seen. This was wall to wall, ceilings, etc. Everything, a complete write off, and doesn't always look like the best attempts to put it out. I can't see a hose. Maybe those are hoses running on the ground, but I can't see them running at the moment unless someone else can. But looks like maybe they're just trying to set them up, but that mall is gone. Here's another angle, a little clearer, a little closer. And this is just a daily occurrence. Something, this would make national news in most countries if this happened in one of your cities. And in Russia, it's just a day ending in Y. The events around Indrivka are even more devastating for the Russian army than anticipated, according to the Ukrainian third. So this was basically the fall of Indrivka and the wipeout of the 72nd Brigade. And like I said, they already got partially wiped out once around Bakhmut after abandoning the Wagner group and not holding their flank. They were embarrassed, called out by Shoigu or by Prigozhin. Anyways, so the third separate assault group, which is the core of it, is the Azov Battalion. The village was completely surrounded, taking out the command staff of the 72nd Brigade, trapping some parts of the brigade. During the entire battle, large portion of the unit were destroyed or captured, effectively destroying the entire Russian 72nd motorized rifle brigade. There's nothing left of it. Their entire command structure and the vast majority of their troops, or KIA, WAA, or POW. The destruction of this Russian army unit ripped a hole in the Russian defenses south of Bakhmut and further complicates the situation for the Russian army, which already has sent large reserves for the Zaporizhia front, exposing other front lines such as this one. Now, some people have stated that there's over 200,000 Russian troops just in the Zaporizhia to Kharkiv Oblast. Not true. Some people have said there's 50,000 fresh troops in Bakhmut alone. I also say not true. It's physically impossible that the Russians, if they've committed 50,000 people to Bakhmut, then there are some serious holes in their line elsewhere. More footage from the liberation of Andriivka. Is this the one that I'm going to? Yes. So I'm not going to show the next three videos. I'm not going to show the whole video of each one of them. I'll show the start, and then I'm going to link all three in the video description so you can watch them. I would recommend that you watch all three of them. They're all very intense, informative videos. However, there are some not safe for work elements to each one of them, and I don't want to have my video restricted, so I'm just going to try to play it smart. So I will. This is around Andriivka, and you can see just the hellscape. Every piece of vegetation, every tree, everything is just gone after multiple. Like, there's no grass. There's nothing. And imagine trying to move across this battlefield. Like, yes, there are some trenches and holes and that sort of thing, but when you want to get from here to there, you are in open terrain. And if there's a sniper off in the distance on that high ground over there, for example, completely exposes you, and drones can see everything for miles. Okay, so I'm going to stop that one there. Like I said, again, I do recommend you watch it. So this one, the storming of Avdiivka by the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, another group of prisoners. At the same time, the enemy, realizing that the village is lost and their soldiers are surrendering en masse, opens fire. So in this one, basically, this is the 3rd Assault Brigade. You can see a few members of it around this area. And they've surrounded some Russian soldiers in this little, whatever area. And as the Russian soldiers are surrendering, Russian artillery calls in strikes on their own soldiers, which I'm not going to show. So these are Ukrainian 3rd Brigade soldiers moving in. There's a strike from this, which is fine. And here are some Russians surrendering. They're starting to surrender, I believe. Here we go. So these are Ukrainians. They're calling to somebody over, where is it? I think he's got one down on the ground there, and they're calling for other ones to come out. This guy comes out, and I'm going to stop it right there. So this gentleman comes out, others come out, other Ukrainian soldiers come in from the side, and then there's an artillery strike called in right where my mouse is by the Russians. And surprisingly, it looks like everybody may have survived that particular strike, or most. But it's not new news that that's exactly what the Russians are doing, is intentionally or unintentionally shelling their own troops. Sorry about that. This one, I'm just going to show a little bit of it as well. This is a great compilation of FPV drones used by the security services of Ukraine, basically taking out all sorts of different targets. You can see a Russian convoy. There's a cope cage on top, slides in under the cope cage, hits that tank right in the front. There's a peon, I believe. There's a T-70 series. And there's the, it looks like a aftermarket commander's cupola or something made there. Nice strike. And these are FPVs just hunting down these tanks and BMPs and artillery pieces and striking them one after the other. And there's just a ton of them in there. So again, I'd recommend watching that video. It's pretty informative, and it's quite interesting to see how skillful the FPV pilots are. Oh yeah, this is another one I'm going to link in the video. So some people have been asking, where's the Kraken? So after a prolonged silence, the legendary Kraken unit of the GUR MO is back in action. Commander Chile unveils the recent exploits in the Garden Center section of the Bakhmut front. Their absence was not inaction, but a brewing storm. Now, someone's got some poetic prose here. Now they've returned stronger and more determined. The silence of the Kraken was but a calm before an overwhelming tempest. Witness their fury in this high-quality video. Beware, for the Kraken has awakened. Like, honestly, who's writing this? I'm not going to play too much of this because I think it goes not safe for work. Bradley? Is that a Bradley? Cope cages all around it?
Пока в укрытие, коробочка отрабатывает, начинаете вы, как принял.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. It's a really cool video. I strongly recommend you watch it. You should watch the history on the Kraken too. If I remember correctly, the Kraken was the one that was formed from a group of friends, soccer fans, etc., that basically picked up rifles and slowly but surely turned themselves into a special operations force. Russia has, or Ukraine has a few special operations units. Some are specialized in different areas. Drone, recon, assault, that sort of thing, and the Kraken is one of them. And they've been the tip of the spear. Wherever it's the hottest, that's where you typically find them, or they make it hot. Breaking news: Poland has joined and announces it will ban cars with Russian license plates from entering the country starting tomorrow. Finland and the Baltic states introduced such a ban earlier this week as well. So nobody with Russian license plates can drive across the border. It's basically a way of banning Russians coming into the EU, NATO countries and EU, without actually saying EU or NATO. They're basically saying those particular car types with Russian license plates are not allowed in. It's pretty brilliant, actually. And will restrict people to tour buses or, domestic cars and that sort of thing. And if you know Russians, they're not going to want to fly into Poland and rent their cars, but they're going to have to if they want to travel there. This was I don't typically cover RT and the Russian propaganda news media, but this was a doozy. Russian MP Zuralev, who's a regular on the show and talks like he's part of special forces himself. He said they can wage war for 10 years and will not stop. We know that Russia can fight constantly. That's why the only way to stop Russia wars is disintegration of Russia. So we have a huge potential. They, the Ukrainian side, say either truce or war for 10 years at least. We're ready for that. We have a huge potential. They, the Ukrainians, say either truce or war for 10 years at least. We're ready for that. That's what Zelensky is saying. About 10 years. No, he doesn't get it. That's not going to happen. You may not be ready for it, but we're really ready. Let them know that. As soon as our offensive happens, which sooner or later, but 100% will happen, they'll sing about a truce immediately. So this gentleman is expecting an offensive to happen out of the Russian forces, and meanwhile they're not even defending the territory that they currently occupy. God forbid we fall for it. There are plenty of people here who want peace and quietness. We even have MPs from parties that are openly against the special military operation and make difficulties for us for its conduct. Such is the situation. We are in a democracy nowadays. So I'm not going to run the numbers, but if you look at the daily update that I give and that everybody else provides, and you think about the fact that they're losing, say that was the minimum amount of soldiers that were removed on a daily basis, and multiply that by a year and then multiply that by 10. Do you really think that the Russians can go 10 years? Or losing 4 tanks a day for 10 years? That's 1,300 tanks. That's a year. That's 13,000 tanks over the next 10 years. The artillery pieces, which typically are in the 30s, it's not possible. I wanted to show this. This is basically a visual. Soldiers returning from the fight. Just look at their eyes, their faces. It's a reminder of what's happening now, why Ukraine, backed by decent people, the world could stop the evil. So a lot of the times that you watch these battles and people say, oh, it's taking so long, it's going slower, why don't the Ukrainians do this or whatever. If you're not there, if you're not experiencing it, if you've never experienced it, then you don't know what you're talking about. It's very, very difficult. Those amazing towns that are liberated, the amazing successes and or failures that the Ukrainians suffer, they come at a cost, and there is a cost every single day. There's not been a day that's gone by where the Ukrainians haven't lost people. So I don't have a translation, I don't think, for this, but just focus on the eyes, the 1,000-yard stare, the tiredness.
Пришел, блядь, упал, рыгаю, блядь, Нурик рыгает.
Да из броня пиздец тяжело.
Ну тепер все вже, можна посміятися.
Да я и там не грустил. Видите, еще провожать начали. Трижды, блядь, с фарами, блядь. Пожелали нам счастливого пути.
Зараз заберуть Лешу.
Уроды, блядь.
he's seen stuff. He's still seeing it. Anyways, so that's the type of thing that I always try to remember when I look too clinically at a war map or an update. Last thing I wanted to show. Sorry, not ending on a high note, but this soldier was lost in Bakhmut. Irina Ponomarenko, Ukraine's defender, she was killed near Bakhmut. Her young son became an orphan. From now on, Ukrainians lose their lives and loved ones 24/7 for almost 9 years. Russian bastards will pay. R.I.P. These are the people that you should also remember when looking at the map and when you're listening to somebody saying it's not going fast enough. Anyways, she's a hero. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Have a great day.